Curtis. We're doing part two now of learning how to learn by Barbara Oakley, and this is directed towards teenagers and some of the challenges that you experience with learning. Now, I've got a bunch of books I want to review. I'm an educator with 35 years of experience, but I want to go through all of these books and come up with best practices for teens so that you can spend less time studying and more time doing other things and yet have a deeper understanding of the learning that's in front of you. Now, Barbara Oakley, the author of this book, she, through high school, failed every science and every math class. And as an adult, she learned skills when trying to learn how to speak Russian in terms of how to learn. And she ended up becoming a professor of engineering, and you can imagine the mathematics that was involved in that. So let's move into part two. Let's have a conversation here, and again, we'll do a summary once we get through all of these books in terms of honing in on what I see as best practices for teens, so your learning experience can become more enjoyable, more fun, and easier all at the same time. So she first starts in this second section, and I should go back and talk about the previous. We learned about short-term memory and long-term memory. We learned about focused mode and diffuse mode. We learned about the Pomodoro technique, which is to set a timer for 25 minutes and focus without distraction, so you get everything else put away. And then after the 25 minutes, you go into what's called a diffuse mode, and you do something totally different. You exercise, you listen to music, you dance, you go outside, maybe give the dog a short walk, and then you come back, and if you need to do another 25-minute session, you do another 25-minute session, and you build that practice into your life, and subsequently what will happen is learning will be easier. So she talks here just in terms of reading. You get assigned a chapter in school, and what you should do is do what she calls a picture walk. And you look through the chapter, you look at the pictures, you look at the headings, you look at the italicized words, you go to the very end of the chapter, you look at the questions that are being asked before you actually go back and do the reading. When you do the reading, feel free to reread if something's not clear to you, but she recommends that you don't do too much in terms of highlighting stuff. And then you use what's called active recall. So you close the book and you write down in handwriting everything that you remember about what you first read. And the same practice could happen, and that you could take advantage of is when you leave class for on a particular day, you take 5 or 10 minutes and you write down everything that you can remember from that class. That's called active recall. And you'll see as we get into talking about axons and neurons and dendrites and all of those types of things, how that helps link learning for you by using active recall. So she talks about brain links, and she'll use metaphors like space aliens, and you'll see what we mean by that. So understanding the basic elements of the brain is very, very important. Your brain has billions of neurons. They're very small. There might take up 10 of them to make the width of a hair. The neuron is considered the eye. They have one arm called an axon and 3 or more legs called dendrites. And I'm going to draw this out for you in a second. The dendrites have many legs. These are called dendritic spines or dendrite spines. This is an important note. Neurons will talk to other neurons in your brain. The axon will reach out and cause a mild shock through a space called a synapsis to the other dendrite spines. And they will create links in your brain. So when you look at if you play sports, and you got a passion for a game, and let's say it's basketball and you're shooting hoops, and the more hoops you shoot, the more connections in the brain happens in terms of your physiology and how much pressure and how much force needs to go into it, how much arc needs to go into the ball. All those things will take place, and you'll develop these axons and dendritic spines that'll link together and allow you to retrieve that information more easily. Important notes. Neurons like to talk to other neurons, and the axon will reach out and cause a mild shock through a space called a synapsis. The communication can go on and on and on to great depths. These are your thoughts that take place in your head. The more neurons send the message, the stronger the link is in place and the easier the recall is for you. Playing sports, practicing a musical instrument, studying a subject like physics, biology, or chemistry, and then neurons in your brain can change and grow, and this is called neuroplasticity. Those things that don't come easily to us, we can learn just as well as those things that do come easier to us, but we just need to learn the tools and the techniques in order to make that happen. So she talks about metaphors, and she loves to use metaphors. And it's a direct comparison between two things. When you think of a metaphor, a trail in your brain is activated. So if you can take one thing, connect it to another thing, then that trail is embedded. Metaphors help you get it or recall it faster. This is known as neural reuse theory, with a solid understanding of how we can all think ourselves smarter. Once we understand that, we can actually become smarter. Now, I want to go back here and let's talk about these so-called space aliens. And I'm going to draw this out for you in terms of what she's got in her book, so you can kind of visualize what's happening in your brain as you're learning. Now, I'm not an artist, but I get the point across. So we're going to start with this thing right here. And this is sort of the nucleus or the center of a neuron. And she draws it like an eye in her book, and there's an eyeball in there, that kind of a scenario. So you've got this one thing that comes off the top, and then you've got these other little stems that'll come out. This is called an axon, and it's going to reach out for two other neurons. And then down at the bottom here, you've got these things that come out, and these here are called dendrites. And think in terms of short-term memory. Some people can remember a list of 3 things. Some people can remember a list of 10 things. We all have different skill sets associated with that. But regardless, if you only have those 3 items that you can remember in a list in a row, you can still learn anything that you need to learn. And then when we begin to, we'll call this here the nucleus. And then as you practice stuff, these dendrites grow these little legs off of them. And these are called dendrite spines. So let's say you use an example of a metaphor in terms of something that you already know to connect with the new thing that you're trying to learn. So then what will happen is, through practice, through spaced repetition, all of these cool things, your axon will be reaching out and connecting with other dendrite spines. And this is where the synapses takes place in here, and there's like a little shock and information is connected. And then of course on the other end of this nucleus, you have more dendritic spines, and the linkages can go on and on and on and on, and your ability to recall just becomes that much easier. So that's what's going on in your brain. Spaced repetition, we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Practice over and over again. You've probably had the experience where you've crammed for a subject because you didn't have any time, and you had a test the next day, and you spent 3 or 4 hours studying the night before, and then you went in the next morning, wrote the test, and you did very poorly. Well, the reason why that happens is because of the fact that your brain hasn't had the time in order to develop those paths within the brain in terms of understanding. And that's where, if you were to spend maybe 10 minutes every night over a 5-night period, in terms of spaced repetition, you would actually perform much better and be much more able to recall the information that you need for that test. So we talked about metaphors. Well, as students, you know this, we all have excuses as to why we can't learn something. The excuse you might use is, I don't have enough time. I don't have a good imagination. That role plays into the metaphor piece, where when you're trying to remember stuff, if you can connect it visually with something else, and the more ridiculous and the more funny it is, the easier it is for you to recall. Later on, we'll get into a scenario where we're talking about memory palaces. So let's say you use your living room and you remember the furniture in your living room, and you've got a list of things you need to remember, and you associate one thing with each thing in your living room, and then you can go through and you make the picture more ridiculous and funny. The easier it is for you to recall a list if that's what you're trying to do. What I'm learning is useless. It doesn't relate or it's not important to you at this time. One of the things I've always asked my teachers to do is when you teach something, relate it to how it is used in the real world. Everything that you learn is useful in some way. You just may not be aware of it yet at this time. My teachers are really boring, and different students get along with different teachers. And I always said if a student could connect with at least one adult in the building, that becomes a valuable place for that student to attend and come to every day. You will have different teaching styles. Some will work for you very well and some won't, but you can rely on your skill set as a learner to overcome those issues. How to wake up smarter. Sleep. Oh, man alive. Sleep is so important to learning. And as a teenager, you need a good 8 hours a night. And I know as a teenager, for many of you, because I've had the conversation with many teens over the years, you sleep with your phone. It's in your hand, it's under your pillow, it might be on the table next to you, and if it vibrates in the middle of the night, you wake up and you look at it and you have this disjointed sleep. You sleep in the morning, you can't get yourself out of bed, etc., etc., etc. This will handicap your ability to learn and actually make it more difficult. Best practice for you, take that phone, put it somewhere else, put it on silent mode, do not disturb mode, and go to sleep. In the morning, you can check and address whatever needs to be addressed, but don't do it in the middle of the night. Neurons change when we learn something new, and then we go to sleep, and that sleep helps us embed the learning. While sleeping, dendrite spines get longer and can create more links utilizing synapses. I am sure most people have been perplexed by a problem and then wake up, and I'm sure you've experienced this as a teenager. You wake up in the morning, or you're taking a shower in the morning, getting ready for school, and all of a sudden the answer comes to you. And that's diffuse mode. We learned about focus mode, we learned about diffuse mode, and diffuse mode, it's like in a test. You come across a question, let's say it's mathematics, and you spend a couple of minutes on it, and you're just not getting it. Put a little note in the column, go on to the next questions, and while you're working on the other questions, your brain will focus and think about that other question, and eventually something will cue and you'll know how to answer that question. That's an example of diffuse mode. It works very, very well on tests. We talked about spaced repetition or spaced retrieval practice. The more you learn, practice, and sleep, the more you grow, the more dendrite spines and the synaptic links, stronger links plus new links. Wow, what a powerful learning structure. Now you can see why procrastination and cramming for a test does not work. You haven't had that time to develop those linkages within the brain. Leaving learning to the last minute means less time to repeat, less sleep, which means fewer synaptic connections. This will impact your ability to recall details. Brief practice sessions over a number of days will allow you to store information for recall. This is called spaced repetition. So she'll use the metaphor of short-term memory like a backpack. You can only put so much stuff into a backpack. And then she'll make a reference to the metaphor of long-term memory being like your locker. A locker can hold way more stuff than your backpack can. School bags are like working memory, small, can't hold much, but really handy as it holds everything you are working on at that time. Now we got to transfer it into long-term memory. Lockers are like long-term memory. It's in the background, down the hallway. It can hold way more, but often it's less. It has so much stuff it's hard to find. Again, Those are the linkages. So you got lots of stuff in your long-term memory, but can you actually find it and retrieve it and produce it for a test? Working memory. It happens up here in your prefrontal cortex, which is above your eyes. Your working memory can be slippery. So let's use the example. You're introduced to 3 people. By the time you get to the third person, you forgot the first person's name. That's slippery. Some people have phenomenal short-term memories, but some have much shorter short-term memories and can't hold as many things. That's okay. You can still learn. That's why remembering lists of things to do can be so challenging. If you're focusing, you can drop that information. Also, that's why learning something hard can be so challenging, like physics, biology, or another language. Some brains can hold more in working memory than others, but that's okay. You can still be a powerful learner and learn the tricks of transferring things into long-term memory. Well, let's talk about the locker. You can store way more information in your locker. It can never be filled. Long-term memory you can't fill it up to capacity. Long-term memory is not centrally located like the prefrontal cortex for your short-term memory. It's way more spread out in your brain and is connected by brain links. And that's the axons and the dendrites. Remember those neurons, axons, dendrites, and dendrite spines. Simple information creates small brain links. More complicated information is made up of longer, more complex sets of brain links. And learn what it is, how to learn. Now, I've had many conversations with many teachers over the years, and they say students don't know how to study. Students don't know how to learn. And it's almost as if teachers have dropped the ball to a certain extent in terms of instilling these practices within their classroom to the point where it becomes a habit for a student. Hey, it's Curtis. See you next time.